This driver has worked for his current employer for 5 years. During that time, he has established a flawless safety record. No accidents, no citations, no problems. When he was hired, he completed a pre-employment drug test. The results were negative. But lately, his supervisor has noticed changes in his behavior. He's been late arriving for work, less timely with his deliveries, and standoffish with co-workers. His supervisor is concerned that he might have an alcohol or substance abuse problem. And if the driver has a problem, the supervisor and the company have a problem too. Everyone agrees that drinking, drugs, and driving don't mix. And it's in everyone's best interest to identify any driver who may have an alcohol or substance abuse problem, and to get that driver off the road. As a supervisor, you have an important role to play in identifying the driver with an alcohol or substance abuse problem. How you go about this identification is what reasonable suspicion training is all about.
Mike, can I talk to you for a minute?
Oh, sure. But I gotta get going. I'm running kind of late here.
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. You've been running kind of late a lot lately.
What the hell is that supposed to mean?
It means you're going to have to take a reasonable suspicion drug and alcohol test.
What, you think that I'm drunk or on drugs?
I don't know, but you haven't been focused on your work, and you've been late a lot, and you got to take the test, and that's it.
Well, what about my load here? I'm all ready to go.
Well, I'll get someone else to take it. Come on, let's walk over to the office.
It's never easy to tell someone that he or she needs to take an alcohol or drug test. But if you know the rules for reasonable suspicion testing, you'll be better prepared to handle these situations. Here's what the regulation says. The employer's determination that reasonable suspicion exists must be based on specific, contemporaneous, articulable observations concerning the appearance, behavior, speech, or body odors of the driver. So the observations concern how a person looks, behaves, speaks, and smells. These observations must be specific. That is, they must be clearly distinguishable. The observations must be contemporaneous. That is, they must be happening as you observe them. The observations must be articulable. That is, you must be able to clearly describe them. And according to the regulation, you may not order a reasonable suspicion test based on the observations of others, or based on a feeling or on intuition. This is why some companies may have a drug or alcohol policy that allows them to test any driver at any time under any circumstance. So what kind of observations should you be making? First, take note of the driver's appearance. The common effects of alcohol and drug use that relate to appearance include poor grooming, bloodshot, watery eyes, slowed reactions, spasmodic eye movement, dilated eyes, and lack of coordination. Behavior is perhaps the easiest element of the reasonable suspicion criteria to evaluate. First, look for changes in the driver's regular behavioral patterns. Perhaps someone who is rarely late or absent suddenly has difficulty getting to work on time. Or someone who is usually easygoing becomes combative and difficult to approach. Clumsiness, drowsiness, lack of coordination, and slow reactions are also behaviors that can accompany alcohol abuse and controlled substances use. Marijuana users may cough excessively. Cocaine users may have constant sniffles or a runny nose. Some controlled substances can cause tremors, excessive perspiration, or rigid muscles. Observable speech effects can include thick, slurred speech and slowed or speeded up speech or talkativeness. Body odors can be related to poor grooming, or you may smell the substances used by the driver. Beer or liquor on the breath or clothing, or marijuana smoke on clothing or in the cab. If you observe these things, your suspicion that the driver may be using alcohol or controlled substances is reasonable. So what are the common symptoms of alcohol misuse and the more commonly abused controlled substances?
Okay.
when you've hired a person, you begin to know them, begin to know their idiosyncrasies a little bit, and then you start finding out, then things start happening that are different. A driver starts taking all kinds of advances, check advances, okay? And maybe that could be for 100 reasons, but one reason could be because he's trying to supply his drug habit. Most drivers are incredibly efficient with regard to their pickup and delivery times, and yet now regularly now a driver's late, or he doesn't get out of home on time, and could he have an alcohol problem?
Physiological changes besides things that we look for in the eyes and the glassiness of eyes, and sometimes wearing indiscriminately eyewear, sunglasses to avoid people and not allow people to see their eyes. But things like odor, breath is number one. Issues of disguising breath mints and things that will help disguise the odor of ethanol on the breath from the night before or several hours before.
As a supervisor, you must observe your drivers with these effects in mind. Let's return to our supervisor and driver.
Reasonable, what? You think that I'm drunk or on drugs?
I don't know, but you haven't been focused on your work, and you've been late a lot, and you got to take the test, and that's it.
Well, what about my load here? I'm all ready to go.
Well, I'll get someone else to take it. Come on, let's walk over to the office.
The supervisor had initially observed that this driver had been late on several occasions, and that he did not seem focused on the job. The supervisor then noticed that the driver was slurring his speech and seemed to be easily irritated. Having made these observations and directed the driver to a reasonable suspicion test, the supervisor may think his work is done, but it's not. One important requirement for any action taken by a supervisor regarding reasonable suspicion testing is to document the process. Your company should have a systematic approach to documenting situations where reasonable suspicion testing is required. Such a system should include the names of the individuals involved, the appearance, behavior, or speech indicators of the driver that triggered the test, and the actions taken. Documentation is required for both controlled substances and alcohol tests. Telling a driver that he or she must take an alcohol or drug test is not easy. It is perhaps one of the most difficult tasks you may encounter as a supervisor. Professionals in the field of substance abuse counseling have developed some effective techniques for approaching the subject of alcohol misuse and controlled substances abuse.
I think for supervisors, when they look at how they can approach an employee, they need to approach the employee in a very respectful manner, in a manner that's caring, with caring tones, but in a manner that's not going to be enabling, not going to be providing excuses. You can expect that when you get into a situation where you're needing to identify work performance issues, that's what I would recommend, focusing in on work performance and the impact of the work performance on the organization.
I've seen situations where nobody wants to say anything. The behavior goes on and on and on, but nobody wants to say anything, as if someday it'll just change, right? And the change is taking place, but it's not a positive change, it's a negative change.
You can imagine in dealing with this situation, you are up against a very difficult and stubborn opponent, and that is dependence. And in dependent situations, they're fighting to maintain their relationship with their drug of choice. And they'll find all the means possible to make sure that that doesn't happen. So, in essence, what you're doing is you're identifying objective behaviors as a basis for getting them help and not getting into an argumentative state or an emotional, subjective type of state with them.
The best way is to know that they're going to be on the defensive and to just straightforward approach them and say, we're concerned about you. And most likely they're going to deny it and be defensive. But they might be at the point where they'll break and say, yeah, I do need some help.
So the company is in a fantastic position to get that person to that next step. It isn't so much how they get into treatment, but that they get the necessary treatment.
Many supervisors have a limited amount of interaction with each driver, so it's important to use that limited time for careful observations. Let's take a moment to see how some trained and experienced supervisors handle this difficult interaction.
A couple hours ago, so I can get in here a little early. My car won't start all of a sudden. Now I'm here.
Can I talk to you for a second?
Man, I don't have time now. I got a hot load going to Chicago.
You were supposed to be here an hour ago to pick up that load. This is the third time you've been late in the last 2 months.
I had car trouble, okay? I had to get my neighbor to jump my car to get it started. I don't need you jumping down my throat now, too.
Well, if you're going to be late, you have to call in. That way we can assign your load to someone else.
Well, I'm here now, so let me get going, huh?
I already gave your load to another driver. Come on, let's go into the office. We can talk about this in private.
The supervisor had been watching this driver for some time. That's how he knew that the driver had been late for work several times in the recent past. During their conversation, the supervisor was looking for the requirements of reasonable suspicion testing. He noticed that the driver was unusually combative, that his speech seemed rushed, and that he appeared unkempt this morning, something out of the ordinary for this driver. These observations led the supervisor to take the driver off the road. To complete this interaction, the supervisor wisely chose to move the conversation to a private setting.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations require me to send you in for testing when I have a reasonable suspicion that you may be using alcohol or drugs on the job. I'm requiring you to go in for testing today.
I'm not drunk, and I don't do drugs. You can't make me take a test.
No, you're right. I can't make you take the test. But if you refuse, I'll be forced to note that in my report. And the consequences for refusing to take the test are the same as the consequences for testing positive. It's up to you, really.
Well, what happens to me if I don't pass the test?
Well, we're required to take you off the road and refer you to a substance abuse professional. It'll be up to that professional to determine what happens next. Whether you can come back to work will depend on our company policy and the recommendations of the substance abuse professional.
Okay, I'll take the test. What do I have to do?
For starters, I'll need to drive you over to the testing facility.
Here, the supervisor observed the suspicious behaviors, confronted the driver in private, explained the regulations, explained the consequences of refusing to take the test, and then escorted the employee to the testing facility. The testing lab performed a breath alcohol screening test and took a urine sample for controlled substances testing. Follow-up will be determined by final results of the tests. If the driver tests positive, he or she must be evaluated by a substance abuse professional who will determine a future course of action for drivers who intend to return to work in the industry. A negative return-to-duty test is required. The driver may also be subject to up to 5 years of follow-up testing. For more information on referral, evaluation, and treatment, consult Part 40, Subpart O in the regulations. Let's view another situation. Here, the supervisor sees a driver actually taking a drink immediately prior to the beginning of his shift.
Don, I saw you taking a drink. I can't put you on the road today.
Go to hell, I wasn't drinking. Give me a break.
Why don't you come back to the office with me? We can discuss it.
If you got something to say, you can say it right here.
No. Let's go back to the office. This is a private matter. Come on. Don, the regulations forbid you to drink at least 4 hours prior to driving. I'm not saying you're impaired, but I saw you take a drink. I've got to send you down for a screening test.
Oh, yeah? I'll take your test now. Give it to me right here so I can get the damn thing over with. You got breath test equipment on you? I'll take your damn test.
Don, I can't administer the test because I'm the one who observed the drinking. Now, the regulations state that you have to go down to a testing site, but you can't drive yourself down there.
In this case, the observed behavior was unmistakable. The supervisor had no choice in the matter. A reasonable suspicion test is required, and it must be given by someone other than the person who observed the behavior. In our next example, we see a driver who has just come off a long cross-country run.
Boy, man, that rain in Oklahoma, man, it was unbelievable, you know? And then the visibility dropped down, so I could hardly see anything, man, you know? And then the winds, when they picked up, you know, it was all I could do to stay on the road, you know? These cars were pulling off to the right and the left, but I just kept on going. You know, I mean, it was like being in a real twister. I am telling you, the wind, I mean, it was just like unbelievable, you know? But I just kept going, and I kept going and going, and I finally got through. You know, and then I heard on the radio that there was an actual sighting of a tornado, like a couple miles out from the interstate, you know? Well, that is the closest I ever want to be to a tornado. I mean, ever. It was unbelievable. It was...
Jerry? Jerry,
Yeah.
can I talk to you in my office, please?
Oh, yeah, yeah, just a minute. Let me finish signing this off. It was pretty cool. Here we go. All right, what's up?
Oh, let's go into my office.
Whatever you say, boss.
So, Jerry, sounds like the weather in Oklahoma was pretty rough.
Oh, yeah.
Are you okay?
I'm all right now, but boy, that was some storm, I'll tell you. Man, the visibility was down to like 100 feet. I mean, cars were bailing out to the left and the right. And the winds, man, it was hard to keep myself on the road. Man, I tell you, it was like a hurricane, man. It was unbelievable.
Jerry, how long has it been since you've slept?
Oh, I don't know, a while. I mean, you know, the storm really held me up, but I had to get my load there on time. Makes for a good payday, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I understand that. Look, Jerry, I don't like to do this, but I have to send you for controlled substance and alcohol testing.
The hell you do?
Now, you can refuse to submit to a test if you want to, but I wouldn't if I were you. I mean, the consequences for refusing are the same as having a positive test result. I'll still have to pull you off the road.
Why are you doing this to me?
Jerry, listen. I've been watching you since you came in, and your behavior it's different than usual, okay? I really have no other choice but to direct you to a reasonable suspicion test. Now, if your test is negative, you can go right back out on the road. If you test positive, at least you'll have the opportunity to get some help. I'll have Elaine drive you over to the test facility. You can't drive yourself there.
Fine.
In this instance, the supervisor observed behavior that is consistent with controlled substance use: rapid speech, talkativeness, sniffling, and running nose. All behaviors that the supervisor regarded as unusual for this driver. The supervisor's goal was to get the driver off the road. He did the right thing by taking the conversation into his office, because the driver has the right to privacy, not only with the test results, but in the need to take the test as well. The purpose for reasonable suspicion testing is to get drivers off the road who may be abusing alcohol or using controlled substances. At the same time, the testing cannot be arbitrary. You must be able to explain your reasons for requiring the test. You want to seek a balance between protecting the driving public and protecting your driver's privacy. It's not an easy balance to strike, but you should know this. At any given time, 2% to 3% of the drivers on the road are drunk. Among professional drivers in the trucking industry, the numbers are much lower, but even one drunk or impaired driver is too many. That's why reasonable suspicion testing is an important process, along with pre-employment, random, and post-accident testing, as well as good company policy, in helping to keep dangerous drivers off the road.
Excuse me, have you got a second?
Sure, what's on your mind?
Well, the doctor called about that drug and alcohol test that you had me go in for. He said I was having an allergic reaction to a prescription medicine that I was taking.
So that's why you haven't been yourself. Well, that's a relief.
Yeah, it sure is. The medication was making me jumpy and keeping me up at night, and I was really thirsty all the time. But I'm not taking that stuff anymore, and it's made a really big difference.
The doctor says you're okay to drive.
Yeah, driving is no problem. He gives me a new medication, and seems to be working really well. No side effects.
Well, that's good news. You know, it wasn't easy to send you in for testing, but we have to follow regulations.
Yeah, I understand. It's for the best, though, I guess. I just want to let you know.
Good, thanks. Where are you off to today?
Not all reasonable suspicion testing has such a favorable outcome. But the important thing is that impaired drivers are taken off the road, get the help they need, and have their rights protected by using policies and procedures that comply with the regulations. Following the regulations isn't just a law. It could save someone's life.